Welcome everyone. Once again, this is Jules Epstein-Hebert, Director of Membership, bringing you another exciting session of the Inclusive Network Town Hall series. We're in season 4. This is episode 3. So we're deep into the season and we've got a lot of great topics for you today, a lot of great speakers. Let me review today's agenda, but before I do, just a reminder today, our presentation is being recorded. We are going to be sharing a recording and copy of the slide deck with everybody later this week, likely, or maybe into next week. But we'll be sharing that with you all. If you have questions throughout the conversation today, please feel free to use the chat tool. Please feel free to use the Q&A tool, and we'll get to that during the audience discussion later on. And please feel free to say where you're from, where you're calling in from, what credit union you're with, if you're with a credit union, or what organization. We're going to get started with today's agenda with some opening remarks, an advocacy update to set the level for today's conversation, and then talk a little bit about state, or hopefully a lot about state level CDFI activity in some of the states. We have JT Blau from Virginia Credit Union League, Linda Levy with the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union, Kieran Marion with the Michigan Credit Union League, Rebecca O'Connell with Lake Trust Credit Union, and I'm also joined by my colleague Alexis Ivanishu to talk a little bit about advocacy and be part of this conversation. Just a reminder for folks, always good to be checking back on the Inclusiv website. This page is linked. Access the latest resources and information on opportunities for credit unions that you can take advantage of. And of course, if you haven't already done so, be sure to register for the annual conference. I believe the 17th, the end of this week, is when the early bird registration rates expire. So definitely want to take advantage of that over the next couple of days. Please reach out to me if you have any questions around registration. I'd be happy to help you. But we look forward to seeing each and every one of you in Memphis in May. So welcome. Welcome to you all. And thank you to our panelists who are on the line as well. Looking forward to a good discussion. I guess without further ado, I will hand over the microphone to my colleague Alexis to talk a little bit about advocacy as it relates to CDFI and where we're at and what we're talking about today. Alexis?
Great. Thank you, Jules. And thank you everyone for joining us, and to our panelists. We're really excited about this conversation today. And those of you who joined our CDFI roundtable at GAC last month or earlier this month got a little sneak preview of some of what we're going to delve into much more deeply today. And I know many of the credit unions on the line today are CDFIs, are familiar with what being a CDFI can do for your institution, not just the opportunities to apply for federal funding, the overall brand and mission and support that provides. And really today, we're going to focus on a benefit that isn't available everywhere yet, but that groups around the country have been organizing to do, which is organizing state level CDFI funding. It's a great way to, potentially diversify grant sources. And so we're going to hear from leaders, as you've heard, from New York, from Michigan, from Virginia, who are going to be able to talk about their work to not just create, but secure funding for and successful implementation of state level CDFI funds. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jules to introduce our speakers.
Thank you so much, Alexis. And I just wanted to add that, we've seen some of the value in the CDFI certification at the state level from some of the recent programs that have been going on, where, like SSBCI is available to credit union CDFIs in many states. That's of course federal funding, but it's been administered at the state level. So there are different programs. Some maybe more attractive to credit unions than others, but also accessing various programs like some of the SBA programs, as well as specifically, having exclusive access to paycheck protection windows when that program was going on was exclusively available to CDFIs for a period of time. So just wanted to highlight some of those as well. And we want to talk about state level CDFI activity. That's the reason why we're here today. I just wanted to highlight our speakers, and maybe we can just go around, starting with JT. I'd love to have you all introduce yourselves.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I'm JT Blau. I'm with the Virginia Credit Union League. A little bit of background on me. I've been at the league for only just over 9 months now. I started in June of last year, but prior to that, came from a credit union. I worked at a Call Federal Credit Union here in Richmond, Virginia for 7 years. Prior to coming over to the league, I did risk management, which for us was compliance, HR, BSA, all the fun stuff. So credit union background, and I'm happy to be over here on the league side of things. And I think we're doing some really great things in Virginia in the CDFI space. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, JT. And before I ask Linda to introduce herself, I just would like in the chat folks to be mindful. If you're in beach weather currently, please don't rub it in for us that are experiencing blizzard conditions in the Northeast. Linda, please say a few words.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. I'm Linda Levy. I am the retired CEO of the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union in New York City. And I am still very involved with the credit union on a consulting basis, as well as sitting on the board. And I'm also involved in advocacy efforts in the state of New York that affect CDFIs throughout the state. Because I've been in the credit union world for a very long time. I was with the Lower East Side since it started in 1986. I have a lot of history with trying to create a CDFI, a state CDFI fund, and then trying to actually get it funded, and then trying to actually get money from it. So I'll look forward to telling you all about it in a few minutes.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, there have been a lot of phases to the process in New York. Now I'd like to ask Kieran to say a few words. Kieran?
Oh, thanks, Jules. Kieran Marion. I'm the Executive Vice President for Advocacy and Communications with the Michigan Credit Union League. I've been with the league, back with the league, not quite 5 years or so, but this is actually my third stint with the league over the past 20. So it's always good to be back in credit union land, and we're looking forward to a great discussion about our CDFI projects up here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kieran. And now Becky O'Connell, welcome.
Hi, Rebecca O'Connell. I work at Lake Trust Credit Union in Michigan. We're headquartered in Brighton, but a statewide CDFI here in our state. I've been at Lake Trust for 4 years, and prior to that, I worked in the legislature. So that gave me a good context for this discussion. But prior to that, 20 years before I started my career actually in a credit union, and I was a single person call center for a very small credit union in Southwest Michigan. Probably why I got the job here at Lake Trust. But yeah, look forward to today's discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Becky. We have all of our speakers have great pedigrees. And that's why we've asked them to be part of this conversation. I think, we're going to hear from Virginia, what's going on there. We're going to hear from some of the work that's been done in Michigan, but I thought it might be nice to start with what I believe is the oldest state level CDFI fund in the nation, the first, New York's state level CDFI fund. So I'm hoping, Linda, that you could talk, and maybe I'll stop sharing so we can focus on our presenters. But Linda, could you share a little bit about what that journey has been like, how you've sort of worked with the other CDFIs and as well as Inclusiv, which is a CDFI, of course, in New York, to build support politically and amongst the CDFIs, laid that foundation, and we're able to make progress and find success so far.
Sure. So the New York State CDFI Fund has actually been in existence since 2007. And so that was a big effort. I will say that Inclusiv, which we called the Federation in those days, was very involved in making that happen. And as was the very beginnings of the New York State CDFI Fund. Sorry, my computer is dropping on the ground here. We of course thought that was like the biggest hurdle there was to get the CDFI fund created and get the legislature to say, yes, we want to have a New York State CDFI fund. Little did we know that that was just the beginning, because we did not get any money budgeted for the New York State CDFI fund until 2020. So it was a long time of lobbying and pushing to get the legislature to put this in the budget. And in the end, we actually got the money because it was not the legislature, it was the governor's office that budgeted the money in what was called in New York State the governor's budget, which is a little bit different from the legislative budget. In any case, we had been asking for various amounts of money for all those years. Sometimes we'd ask for $200 million. Sometimes we'd ask for $50 million. What we ended up getting was $25 million to be paid out over 5 years, which is really pretty much nothing. And that was supposed to be in, as I said, 5 years, 5 tranches starting in 2020. So here we are right now. It is March of 2023, and there's only been $5 million put out. So we're hoping, we hear a rumor that there will be an announcement in May for the next tranche of $5 million. So I guess one of the things that I think is really important to talk about from the New York State experience is some of the pitfalls that we had and that we're still facing. And I think, so for those of you who are trying to create CDFI funds in your states, I think it's really important to try to convince your legislature to follow the model of the federal CDFI fund. Because the beauty of the federal CDFI fund is that it's there to increase capacity for CDFIs. And when you think about it, we really, as CDFIs, when we apply to the CDFI fund, we are telling them what it is we think we need to do to build our capacity. That's like one of the most critical elements of the concept of the federal CDFI fund. And if that had been part of the New York State CDFI fund, I think we would have seen the money put out a lot faster. We had a further complication in New York that we have an existing agency that had their own pot of money that they called a CDFI fund, but it wasn't what we meant and they knew that it was not the New York State CDFI fund. So it became very complicated. So I would say that the lessons learned in New York is that you need to be very clear from the beginning what exactly it is that you're looking for, and then make sure that whichever agency in your state is going to end up administering the fund understands the concept of a CDFI and why you need this fund money and what the ultimate goal should be. Like, how are they supposed to measure success of the CDFI fund? And without those elements, you end up in the weeds that we are experiencing in New York State. But I don't want to make it sound like it's a bad idea. I think you guys, I think everyone on this call, you should do whatever you can to create a CDFI fund in your own state, because in an ideal world, it'll be number one, another source of funding for you. And number two, a source of funding that's much closer to you than the federal CDFI fund, which the federal CDFI, it's like putting money out there to everyone in the country. It's so much, it should be so much better to have a CDFI fund in your state that is actually working with you, that knows you better because you are part of the state, and can really work with you to increase your capacity and set reasonable goals and objectives for your credit union's growth. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Linda. That's very helpful. And I think we'd love to not pick that apart, but dig a little bit deeper into some of that. But I'd love to hear from what's going on in some of the different experiences in the other states. And I'd love to come back to New York. Maybe we'll start. I know that it was a great collaborative effort in Michigan amongst the different types of CDFIs, the league, the members of the legislature in getting the CDFI fund established there. Maybe we'll start from the credit union perspective. Becky, can you talk about how you first got involved in the work in Michigan around CDFI funding?
Sure. I would say, all good ideas start with coffee or beer. This one started with coffee, but we credit unions started, sharing in the CDFI space what they were doing, just very informally. And we'd had an overlapping meeting with the lawmakers. So I was like, well, why not just invite them to come listen in? And I think the pandemic, through a lot of the stimulus dollars and all the good work that Inclusiv did, CDFI became this buzzword, but no one really knew what it was. And so by just taking the time to explain what we do and the impact that we have through our programs, at that time, it matched up with lawmaker goals, which were, the pandemic was shutting down our communities, and they needed to figure out ways for businesses to stay operational and allowing dollars to reach people who needed it. And so, it was an unfortunate perfect storm in our state that I think allowed us the opportunity to tell our story and the impact we were making in our members' lives. And then through that, we had the great support of our credit union league and the collaboration amongst all the credit unions. So that's kind of what got the conversation started here.
Excellent. And can you just actually, for those who aren't up to date on what's going on in Michigan, can you just give a overview of what you've achieved?
Yeah, so it was through a supplemental appropriation that we were awarded, credit unions and loan fund CDFIs were awarded $75 million. And so right now we're in the process of solidifying that, those grant agreements and distributions to CDFIs who wanted to participate throughout the state.
Awesome. Thank you, Becky. I'd love to hear from Kieran a little bit about the role that the league has played in Michigan with these efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jules. And this was, at the beginning of this, probably like a lot of other credit union leagues, CDFIs was a thing, but the level of detail and depth that I think we have been engaged in this space over the past 2 years really is a result of this whole effort, which was brought to us by our members. Becky from Lake Trust, and then Allegan Credit Union and Frankenmuth Credit Union came to us together to talk about this idea that had kind of grown out of the membership. And it was one of those, it was like lightning in a bottle. It's like, absolutely, we're going to go try to help our members, achieve this and bring this home. It really was a pretty unique collaborative process, Jules, as I think you hinted at, and as Becky said as well. We have here in Michigan 26 certified CDFI credit unions out of our 199 total, some of which are very sophisticated deployers, some of which had never taken a grant before, but still a fairly large community and very in tune to what we were trying to do. And then on the other side of the coin, there's about 25 or 26 loan funds, and I think we have one, maybe two banks that are certified for CDFI here. So it really very quickly became a very collaborative effort. Our credit unions were fantastic in this process. I think one of the key things that really helped kind of bring this across the line was their ability to tell their stories about the types of programs that they use, the federal funds that they've been drawing down from everything from alternative mortgage programs to small business assistance to payday lending alternatives, things like that. So really the membership really engaged, I think, to help the league push this along with our colleagues on the other side. So that was fantastic. As Becky mentioned, we were able to successfully secure 75 million for that fund. It's run through our Michigan Economic Development Corporation. I think I saw a note in the chat that sounds like New York runs it through a very similar entity there. And to Linda's point, I think one of the keys that's really making this go very seamlessly right now is that we really did adhere to the federal model. Our legislature was very concerned about making sure that they wanted to make sure that the funds reached their purpose and reached it quickly. So they tried to make it as turnkey as possible. So our whole coalition worked on drafting that language to make sure that it was kind of airtight, that, MEDC got the money, and then, they were able to effectively process it through quickly and get it out. I think, as Becky mentioned in some conversations with that agency today, I think most of it is it's through the application process. 19 of our 26 were successful and they're applied, and all 19 were successful. So it's in the grant writing phase right now, and we're hopeful, I think by mid-April, we'll see that money start to actually deploy out to the credit unions and the loan funds to use. So we're in a good space at this point. I think, looking forward, we're now in the FY24 budget process as well as supplemental process for the current FY23. We are looking at a couple potential adjustments to that program, particularly as we watch the federal process unfold and some, all the concerns that are inherent in that. Because we did follow the federal model, we want to be very careful about decertification should it happen, and some adjustments there. So some food for thought as you kind of approach how you model these types of programs. And as well, frankly, I think, we deployed, we received under grant, I think all but 7 million of the 75 million that was done. I think there's some other folks out there that would maybe some of our larger, more sophisticated deployers could definitely have used any amount of money that was given to them. So I think kind of going back to make sure that we can do a second round off of that fund to redeploy the 7 million and seeing what other funds might be available. I think, the initial success of, the rollout phase of this, I think has been impressive to policymakers. And I think our folks have continued to make a good case for the work that we have done and the work that we're going to do. So we're going to keep that conversation going.
Yeah, and I think Kieran highlighted a really good point, which was the airtight in the language, right? Which Linda alluded to is where kind of the problems came into play. And taking kind of the guesswork out of how and what that looks like, I think was helped make this process smooth. And, we left that up to lawmakers and, they decided, what they thought would be the right distribution there.
And I would add to Michigan's a state that has a very strong blend of both urban and rural areas. The fact that credit unions and loan funds from all corners of our state, from every different type of area, were actually able to tell a story that mattered to one member of the legislature or the other two. We had a very bipartisan, very kind of unified effort within the legislature by the end of it to bring this across the finish line.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is really important in those discussions was that, all credit unions make a great impact in our communities. And this is one additional tool for us to be able to do that and go even further in our work. Because we as CDFIs, right, we're very distinctive in what we do and we've earned that certification. But at the same time, just highlighting that credit unions all serve with mission and purpose, I think also allowed us to have their support in this process, which I think was really important.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Becky and Kieran. I'm wondering, and before we got on, I said I called Virginia the new kid on the block, but that's not really fair. to them. But JT, I'd love to hear, I said that because you all are the most recent state to pass legislation around a CDFI fund at the state level. So JT, I want to hear from you about what's going on in Virginia, where you're at, and maybe how you've incorporated some of the lessons learned in other states into your advocacy efforts in Virginia.
Yeah, sure thing. And don't mind being called new kid on the block. We get called a lot worse things in Virginia, so that's not so bad. But so for us, just a little bit by way of background for those who don't know, Virginia in 2021, the General Assembly passed a $10 million budget amendment that effectively created and funded the Virginia CDFI fund. I saw a comment in the chat about who administers these. For us, this was administered through the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development and was actually operated through the Virginia Small Business Resiliency Fund. So, there was a lot of demand for it. I think the initial application period, for the fund, it opened up just over a month, and they got $16 million worth of applications for the $10 million in funds. So there was a good demand for that funding. Here in Virginia, we have 7 CDFI credit unions of our 105 credit unions in the state. And so more recently, during this year's state session, which just wrapped up a couple weeks ago, a bill was introduced to permanently codify the fund and create a separate CDFI program that would provide these grants and loans. And so the Virginia General Assembly is still working on a budget. They kind of passed a half budget or an intermediate budget, whatever that means, but they're still hammering it out. But it looks like we're going to get at least $5 million allocated to the fund for next fiscal year, which is great. So in terms of the passage, I mean, politically speaking, there was not a whole lot of opposition to the bill this year, which was great. It's passed unanimously in our Senate and 98-2 in our House. The industry stakeholders who spoke on the bill, all spoke in favor of it, and it was kind of nice to be on the same side of the argument as the Virginia Bankers Association. I take any opportunity I can get to work with them. So that was a great way to see that kind of move through the process without too much pushback, at least from the lawmaker standpoint. And what we found is really effective when discussing this program with lawmakers is sort of the leveraging concept. When we say that this funds that are allocating, it's $5 million, but the impact that that's going to have on economic development is just so much more than that, that we can really turn those dollars into more dollars, not just for the state, but for the people that that money is going to. And we really, that argument has really resonated very strongly. And I'll give credit to Amanda Hibansky, one of our CEOs of one of our CDFI credit unions, first made that to me, and it really hit home. And we, stole that immediately and have found that to be great, very successful with our lawmakers. And then the last thing I'll add is something that triggered my sort of memory here with what Becky was saying about it being kind of a buzzword sometimes. And what we found with some of our credit unions is, they knew about CDFIs, they knew they existed, kind of what they did, but it was like, oh, that's not even something that we could do, right? That's not, it's just not sort of who we are. And then they'll have an exam and their examiner will come in and say, hey, you guys are pretty close to the low income designation threshold. Have you thought about that? And then the credit union starts to look into that, and looking into low income brings them into CDFI, and they kind of start learning about all this stuff. And on the federal level, as soon as the blackout period hit, we got inquiries from multiple credit unions about how do we do this? How do we become CDFIs? And, the timing, you can't make it up sometimes. But I think there's more and more education out there, and I think more and more credit unions are looking into this as really wanting to understand it. And, I think that's great for everybody involved.
Well, thank you, JT. That's really helpful. And also I wanted to second that shout out to Amanda Bansky with People's Advantage in Virginia for doing a lot of great work spearheading the efforts there. So thank you, Amanda. Thank you, JT. Of course, you highlighted something that I think is important and something that we emphasized during our GAC roundtable, the CDFI credit union update at the GAC, which is that, you know, bipartisanship is something that we really want to preserve, the support on a bipartisan level for the CDFI fund. And we're seeing that in effect in New York to some extent, but to even more extent, I think in Virginia and Michigan, how that can lead to good results for CDFIs. And really that compelling story around how we as CDFI credit unions especially can leverage every dollar of grant funding into $10, $11, $12 in lending out to these communities. So that's something that I think is relatively unmatched and is a very compelling thing for legislators.
Yeah, Jules, I'll add on to that real quick. Virginia, we have a split legislature. Our House is Republican controlled and our Senate is Democrat, and the message, you know, resonates pretty well on both sides of the aisle on this one.
Awesome, thank you. Now, before we go to questions from the audience, I'd love to kick it back over to Linda to talk a little bit about where are we going from here in, you know, with a state that's established a CDFI fund, established funding. Maybe it's not perfect, but, you know, we got $5 million out the door. We're hoping to get a second $5 million tranche out the door. You know, how do we make this work even more effectively for New York CDFIs, Linda?
Well, you know, as I kind of alluded to, I think that the biggest hurdle that we have for the CDFIs themselves has been the application process to receive the grant money. And I should point out that this is true not just for the CDFI credit unions, but also for the CDFI loan funds in the state that have also been, you know, who have also worked to get this fund started. We are members of a coalition across the state that represents people from rural, city, upstate, downstate, everywhere throughout the state of New York that is working to try to get this money, number one, loosened up, number two, increased, and number three, to be administered, as I was saying, in a way that is more reflective of the federal CDFI fund. And we are actually very eager to use our friends in Michigan's experience to kind of push our legislature here, because, you know, New York always likes to be the first, the biggest, the most out there, you know, so we're hoping that we can say, well, look what they're doing in Michigan. If they're doing that in Michigan, we should be doing that here in New York, and hope that will sway some of them. But I mean, I think that there's certainly a value to the fact that the CDFI, that it's somewhat established. We don't have a big issue in terms of convincing people that the CDFI fund is a good thing to have. It is, you know, something that everyone pretty much supports, but when it comes to the budget, there's just so much squabbling in the state over every penny and who's getting credit for what. And, you know, I'm sure this is true for all of you. You know, New York is not unique in having a lot of political infighting going on all the time. So, you know, I think that is the one hurdle that I think we all face when we're talking about a state CDFI fund, is that, you know, some of that stuff that happens on a state level is, you just have to be able to navigate all of that and know who you're talking to and kind of use what you know about their allegiances to get people to work together on your behalf. And as I said, I mean, after all, we were successful. We got it established in 2007. It's just been a matter of fine tuning it now. And I think hopefully over the next year or two, we will be able to get to a point where we have additional funding and have a mechanism for getting that funding out more quickly.
Thank you, Linda. And I also wanted to emphasize something that you mentioned earlier and again now, that the ideal is to get the state to follow the model of the CDFI fund. Now, the financial assistance award application is okay. The TA application is pretty good. We really like the rapid response program application. That is the most streamlined, the most easily accessible for applicants. And that's something that we've been pushing for in New York State. And I think something that Michigan was very successful in emulating.
Yeah, definitely. I think we all love that rapid response. That was great. We hardly had to do any work for it, and we all got money. It was really good. And of course, we started fighting for this before that program was developed. So now that we have that program, we're like, well, forget what we said about the federal, we're not talking about the FA awards now. We're talking about, RRP. So I think, but I also wanted to bring up the fact that other panelists have said about making the point of how much we leverage money, because that is really the key. And that's what always, in our conversations with both the governor's office, which were successful, and with the legislature, is that, they want to know how much impact this money is going to have. And compared to almost any other program that they're putting money into, CDFIs really are able to prove that there is a bigger impact dollar for dollar in money that is given to CDFIs than in virtually any other program that the state might be funding. So it's really important when you're working with the legislature to make that point really, really clear. And I can assure you that if you don't know the statistics yourselves, Inclusiv will definitely be able to help you with those numbers.
We'd be happy to. We actually have state level profiles available on our website, and I can send those to you upon request. And we have a national profile, and we got a whole other set of numbers we can send your way. We got number soup for you. I think I'd better just before we go into the audience discussion, share some upcoming events, and then I'd love to open up the floor for folks to ask their questions of our panelists. So a reminder, we always have our office hours Wednesday afternoons at 3 p.m. for CDFI certification related questions. Feel free to tune in, log in, and hear from our experts. Similarly, we've got experts from the CU Operations and Compliance team who do a webinar every fourth Tuesday of the month from 1 to 3 p.m. So please, if you're interested in more information about those services, do call into those sessions. And the next town hall session will be on April 11th. You're already registered if you're on this call, but there is a link if you want to share it for your colleagues. There's also at the end of this month, the New York State CDFI Coalition is having its annual conference up in Albany. I don't have a slide for that, but for our New York members, I'll share some information about that as well with you. And finally, May 1st through the 3rd, I mentioned this earlier, the early bird rate expires at the end of this week, so please take advantage. We look forward to seeing you in Tennessee in May. Now, oops, went too far. Audience discussion. If any of our panelists have anything to add, that would be great, but if not, I'd love to hear from folks in the audience. Maybe you're involved in one of these state efforts and you want to share some additional pieces, or maybe you're just trying to get the efforts started or furthered in your state. We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to enter in the chat or use the Q&A, or if you raise your hand, we can likely call on you.
Jules, I think Alexis put a link into the fact sheets. I would echo they were very helpful for us in our efforts too. We definitely appreciated your support and the efforts that we put forward here too. Those were extremely helpful for our lawmakers.
Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, what we have available is as of Q3 2022, I think those numbers. So I guess this is a question from Jeff Ivey at River City in Texas. Do you have a suggested starting point in trying to get a state fund established? Definitely a question. Thanks, Jeff. That's to all of our panelists.
Yeah, unfortunately, the state fund in Virginia establishment was just a year or two before I came onto the league. So I can't speak firsthand on on that how it went down here and that kind of thing. But if you've got good CDFI credit unions and have candidate state representatives who are credit union friendly, just always be laying that groundwork and and talking to them, and they'll we all have our champions in our state houses, and this can definitely be a good opportunity for that.
Yep. I would add, I'm very big on the fact here that this really did start with our member credit unions, our CDFI credit unions that really understood the work that they were doing. They were able to, bring it to the league and articulate not only what they do, but how they needed us to help and where to go. So I really think it does, from a start standpoint, it really does begin at that, with the member credit unions, with that grassroots effort of organizing, your thoughts on what you need and what you want, and then helping us to build that coalition.
I think just inviting lawmakers, your representatives, to coffee and show them what you're doing and have an impact sheet to share with them. Then you can share what has happened in other states.
And I would add too, and I would encourage your league too to get to know the other side of the industry as well, the loan fund folks there too, because they're having a lot of the same conversations in the areas. Their folks, it became a very effective combination that multiplied our political efforts on this front too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to emphasize. I know that in New York, this was the case, but also in Michigan, there was a lot of success and sort of all different types of CDFIs coming together, working together. I know there were challenges. We don't always see eye to eye, but I think that this is what led to the successes that we've seen in both of those states. So a question from Alexander Muldrow. Good question. Are there reasons for why a credit union can be turned down from this grant? So Alexander, first of all, these are all different unique grant programs. They're all kind of based on the concept of the CDFI fund and their grant programs for CDFIs at the state level. But, Virginia is going to put together its own grant program. Michigan put together a unique grant program. And New York created its own grant program. So in Michigan, I think basically you just need to show evidence that you're a CDFI and put in your information. And if you're a CDFI and you put you applied for an adequate amount of money that you can access based on the rules of the grant, then you'll get funded. With New York, there were specific things that they wanted you to do with the funds. They wanted you to, promote banking services and depository services for unbanked members. This was a program that is not perfect, and we're looking to improve for the next tranche of funding that's coming out in the next couple of weeks. So, there might be more reasons that a CDFI credit union would be turned down from that grant. I don't know, JT, what's going on in Virginia and how you're thinking about structuring the grant program there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak to that too much. I know there were some some initial caps put in on how much an organization could get and some different things like that. And but other than that, I mean, it was if it was coming from a CDFI and it was an eligible purpose kind of thing. So yeah, I can't speak too much to the details on that.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, JT. More to come on that. I'm sure you'll share the details as they become available. We can distribute that to our members. Sue Cuevas, I talked to you at GAC, so I'm glad you're still on board for trying to get this movement started in Ohio. We would love to support you all there. And of course, before we close up, I'm sure Alexis has a few parting words for those that are trying to start state level funding sources for CDFIs. Brian asks, and this is for Linda, didn't there used to be another New York State funding source for CDFI credit unions, or has it always been the New York State CDFI fund? Linda mentioned that ESD, Empire State Development Corporation, had a separate fund that they called the CDFI fund, but it was restrictive and different. I don't know, Linda, if there's anything you want to add there.
No, I mean, it's just that is the problem that we're dealing with, right? That we're continuing to deal with, is that Empire State had this fund. They are in the same mindset that they've always had about this other fund that they administered. And it is a very unwieldy application process and a very unfriendly evaluation process. And it's just to the point that most of the CDFIs in New York State, both credit union and loan funds, have said that even if this money gets released in May, that a lot of them are not going to even bother to apply because of how difficult Empire State has made it. So Empire State, they've been around for a while. They claim to have been making loans to grants to CDFIs and loans to CDFIs, but they've never really achieved the goals that we have for the state fund.
Thanks for clarifying, Linda. Jeff Ivey, still in Texas, is jazzed. He's getting ready to start it in Texas. So anyone from the Cornerstone League, please reach out to Jeff if you're on the line from Texas. We'd be happy to connect you with Jeff if you're interested in starting this movement. Same thing in Maryland, Alexander with U.S. Postal Service FCU. We'd love to work with you to get something to spread this from Virginia north to Maryland. This is a good kind of epidemic we'd like to see, an epidemic of funding for CDFIs. One question in the Q&A, Winifred French asks a very good question. If there's concerns about new pending requirements for CDFI applicants, not just in Illinois, Winifred, but everywhere, Michigan, and throughout the whole country. So, but I mentioned Michigan because I know, Kieran, you had sort of mentioned that as with these new standards, that the CDFI fund becomes a little bit more restrictive in their certification requirements, we may need to address that in some of the applications and the language that we use on the state level.
Yep, no, that's right. I think when we did the program, and it started kind of well ahead of the whole blackout period and everything else that was beginning to go on at the federal level, we mirrored the federal requirements. And one of the federal requirements, they want you to stay certified, or else they're going to come calling. So when we look back at the language that has now been done for the state, we want to make sure that for the state fund purposes, our members aren't caught by surprise if, unfortunately, if the federal process doesn't work out properly for some of them. It would be a shame for them to have to figure out, what to do with those funds or how to repay those funds, et cetera. So from the state perspective, we are very closely watching and working with Inclusiv and CUNA about what's going on with the certification process and the application process. I think as JT mentioned, in addition to the 26 we have, this whole process at the state level generated a lot of interest among other credit unions too. So I think we've got a number of folks that are either about to jump in the application pipeline when it opens back up again, or were caught and just as it had closed off. So I think, there's a lot of interest here in that process and how that works out.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
definitely.
would just caution that, even though we are concerned, I mean, everyone in the country, I think we're all concerned about the new certification process that the federal CDFI fund is contemplating. But, whatever it is that they come up with, I think the last thing we want is to have a separate certification process in each state that the CDFIs are going to have to go through to be able to qualify for funding when you have a CDFI fund. As bad as it may get, I'm afraid that we're really better off sticking with using the same qualifications as the federal CDFI fund, so that CDFIs don't have to go through two separate certifications, sort of just like, if you're state chartered and you have to have a federal examiner and a state examiner, it's not an ideal world. So I would just say, I think we should try to stick with the federal guidelines.
I appreciate that, Linda. Of course, Inclusiv's position is that we support strong standards for the CDFI fund and CDFI certification. We want to make sure those standards and the data and evidence that the CDFI fund is looking at for making those determinations work for credit unions, that they are, asking for data that as regulated depositories subject to ECOA regulations, we can meet those requirements. So that's where Inclusiv continues to be focused as these changes are being made. And if you have any concerns, please do feel free to share those specific items with us. Wanted to highlight Mike Delker's point in the chat with the Cornerstone. Mike's definitely been discussing this opportunity in the Cornerstone region, definitely movement there. So looking forward to seeing progress and hearing how Inclusiv can assist there. And then Gary Perez, thank you so much. We need to rally California credit unions and other CDFIs and get that organized. I can share a roster. I will share a roster with you, Gary, of those institutions in California. I can share a roster of both CDFI credit unions and all CDFIs. This is also available on the CDFI Fund's website, but that's something that we can share with you all upon request, so feel free to reach out to me. I know my colleague Alexis is frozen, and she had a few parting words of support to share, so I'll try to do my best to share that. But before we go, any final questions from the audience? Alexis, are you back?
Maybe, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
I don't know what's going on with my video, so I'm sorry for being a blank box rather than a person.
That's all right.
But sure, just parting encouragement. It's so exciting to hear from everybody who wants to tackle this in their states. As Jules has said, throughout this town hall, we are delighted to be a resource to help build bridges and connect you to others who are interested in this work, to others who have done this work that you can learn from, and to share our experience having been a participant in the organizing in New York as well. So again, we're just really excited that people want to take this opportunity and are looking forward to working with you on it.
Thanks, Alexis. Any final words from our panelists?
I would just say, from a league perspective, if you're at a credit union and this is something that you're, want to get going in your state, please contact your league. We want to work for things that are that are valuable, meaningful, and wanted by our credit unions. So reach out to your other CDFI credit unions, and most importantly, reach out to your league. Any feedback we can get from our member credit unions about, hey, we want this, even if it's specific initiatives, is always great for us.
Thanks, JT. Well, I want to thank our panelists, JT, Linda, Kieran, Becky. Thank you as well to my colleague Alexis for her participation in this webinar. And of course, thank you to all of you attending at home and at the office. Thank you so much for calling in. We wish you a great afternoon, a great end of your week, and we look forward to talking with you all again next month. Have a great evening. Take care.